Thanks. It's great to be here. We don't have anything that looks remotely like this in the United States, so it's particularly appreciated. The topic I'll speak about tonight, I think, is one that really hasn't been talked about a lot in these sorts of venues, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I want to really stress the kinds of personal ideology that you really have to bring new drugs to people. And in fact, the more new drugs we have and as drugs get better, it becomes more and more important to focus on reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And I hope you'll see why as we go through this, and I will tell you a couple of stories which I hope you'll enjoy. One of the things that I think is the greatness, that exemplifies the greatness of the human mind, and truly of reason and purpose, are the design of medicines. We don't take a lot of time to think about that. But if you think about it, chemicals and biologicals that you can take to change the course of a disease you get, to put something in your mouth or inject or take some other way, it's quite remarkable. And in many cases, we can remove or postpone what we in medicine like to call biological mishaps or catastrophes, depending on how bad the disease is, from derailing our lives. And I always believed when I was practicing full-time that the main purpose of medicine was to give people back their lives and to do everything I could so that they could enjoy their lives. And I just would bring in that this really is a philosophical, has philosophical connotations as well, because in order to pursue happiness, you have to be relatively healthy. And that seems obvious, but maybe it isn't to everybody. And I think one of the things medicine is starting to develop, at least in the US, is to really understand that our job is to get people back to doing what they want to do and not tell them to go home and rest for 2 weeks, because most people don't want to do that. If they want to rest, that's fine. The three principles that Ayn Rand speaks about and exemplifies, reason, purpose, self-esteem, are actually very germane to this topic that most of us don't think about. How do you bring a totally new chemical or biological, a totally new molecule that never existed on the planet before to the billions of people that we have on this planet in order to arrest or at least slow down a disease? You have to reason behind any novel therapeutic. When a scientist starts to think about, I want to change this disease or I want to interfere, you have to reason it out. You're no longer allowed to sort of try stuff. Those days are over. And you don't get to observe people, grinding up tree bark to see what will happen. Those days, thankfully, are over. You have to have a purpose and bring it to the laboratory, and you have to be able to, now in this day and age, enunciate that purpose. Now, most people involved in this won't ever be so objectivist about it, but I know with this audience I don't have to apologize. That's in fact what they're doing. And you have to have an unwavering purpose, because when you start to think about bringing a new medicine, it will take 10 to 15 years for that medicine to get out to the general population. And that's the way it is. And frankly, for the most part, it ought to be that way. Sometimes it ought to be faster. And if you look through it all, we can always look backwards and say it should have been faster. But that's what it takes. And we have to gather enough safety information. We have to understand these things, especially given how complicated people are becoming, because we all get older. We all have multiple conditions that we're living with, and we're living better. So we have to add on to what we used to have. In medicine, there used to be an old adage, the Occam's razor, that you found the one thing to explain what was happening to the patient. Those days are gone. There's rarely a patient today with serious illness that one thing is happening to them. So you're dealing with a complicated situation. Reason, purpose, and self-esteem. And I want you to imagine for a minute, just think about it. A totally new chemical that's never existed on the planet is going into a human being in an hour from now. Are you nervous? It's been in animals. Okay, it's been in 2 or 3 different species of animals, maybe some primates, meaning some monkeys, typically. But you want to put a new drug into humans? I can tell you're up all night. And the best thing you want to hear tomorrow morning is nothing. All right? And when a person embarks on this sort of double marathon of drug innovation and bringing through approval, they really have to have this philosophical fortitude to do this. And it's very tough. And you have to believe in yourself. You have to have an incredible amount of self-confidence. I, the inventor, the developer, must be right, and I will trust my opinion. And to quote it, since we're in Britain, I'll quote T.S. Eliot, yes, I dare to disturb the universe. Yes, I dare to disturb the universe. Because that's what you're doing. Disturbing the universe is a pretty daunting task, and frankly, the universe doesn't generally like to be disturbed, as you know. And in medicine, where we're getting more and more complicated patients and sicker patients, it becomes more and more daunting, but somebody has to do it, and it's a great thing to do. Let me just talk a little bit about the training that I went through and some of the stories that I went, because I think they're very relevant. And Ayn Rand herself was quite helpful to me as I went through my training. I knew from a pretty young age, because I was a nerdy little kid, this word exists in Britain, right, nerdy? I was a little bit off. That I loved medicine and science. And I also knew for some reason, I had this sense that science was racing ahead and we were making all sorts of breakthroughs. And medicine was this silly thing where people put stethoscopes on you and hit your knee and they looked in your ear. I mean, really. And that was supposed to tell you for what was going on. And I just had the sense that there was this gap. And I had a sense early on in my life that I wanted to help bridge the gap. I worked really hard. I was serious. Luckily, my mom especially, but my dad too, made me play sports. So every day after school, I was either playing American football, and then I got smart and played regular football, soccer, when I became too little and everybody got too big. And I wrestled, and I played tennis. And thankfully, I wrestled, because wrestling is, one-on-one. This is not American on TV wrestling. This is like high school and collegiate wrestling, where you're actually wrestling, not throwing people against chairs and things like that. Because it's one-on-one, and you're stuck. And I was focused, and I was very driven, and really Howard Rourke's struggles in the Fountainhead, and a lot of what, frankly, Hank Rearden went through in Atlas Shrugged was so relevant to me initially, as I went through and read these books in junior high school and so on. And I really wanted to be self-reliant and carve my own path. And I knew I needed a lot of training. So as I went through college, which I enjoyed but really was pretty serious about, I thought I would go to a medical doctor and a scientific degree, a PhD program. And I went from Amherst College, where I majored in biochemistry, over to Johns Hopkins Medical School, where I did the combined MD-PhD program, which is a short 7-year program. And in America, of course, that follows 4 years of liberal arts education. So this is 11 years after graduating high school. I think I was 62 at the time I got out. But then the good thing about that is that you get to come to an internship and a residency. And there's a reason these are called internships and residency. Internship is the first year after postgraduate medical education, so you graduate from medical school. But you are interned, like a criminal, in the hospital. You are interned. And after 1 year of surviving that, if you survive your first year of your punishment as an intern, you become a resident, which means that you are now only a resident of the hospital, suggesting that you might take a trip every now and then, but you're still fundamentally living at the hospital. And this was at Johns Hopkins Medical School, which was amazing training and really fantastic for both the MD, PhD. And I graduated in '92. So it's hard for a lot of you to remember what 1992 was. Some of you weren't really here back in 1992. But I will just remind people that in 1981, the AIDS virus was first reported. And this is not something that's on our lips every day anymore, thankfully. The virus that caused, the AIDS syndrome was reported in 1981, and the virus was discovered in 1983, 1984. When I was at Hopkins in 1985 for my first year, and we went to the wards, and we had a patient with what we thought was AIDS. We had all sorts of weird names back then, but let's call it AIDS. We were terrified. We knew the virus. We had no idea how this virus could be transmitted. We had people in rooms that are vacuums, basically, so that nothing could get out of the room. You walked in, you were gloved-bound, you looked like you were in something out of a sci-fi movie with an epidemic. It was really scary. And it turned out that a lot of those patients had infections that we had really never characterized, or were the stuff of one case report in 10 years. Very uncommon stuff. We didn't know. We learned a lot, and we learned it quickly. The problem was back then, it was a uniform death sentence. It was absolutely fatal almost for everybody. It turns out there was a small group of patients that were genetically different than the rest of the patients, and this actually led to a drug. But for 95% of people who got this virus, they were going to die. And in 1987, in the United States, AZT was approved, and shortly after over here, AZT, zidovudine, was the first drug approved. It delayed progression. By today's standards, it was a barbaric therapy. It actually had started as an anti-cancer drug. Now, I want to fast forward really quickly because in 35 years since the discovery of that virus, or since the report of that disease, I should say, 35 years later, this is essentially a chronic disease with normal lifespan expected. We have approved over 20 different drugs in 6 different drug classes for this disease. And although we've not cured it yet, and we are working hard to do so, we, the pharmaceutical industry, we're working hard to do so. Most people who get HIV infection now, we don't call it AIDS anymore because they don't have the syndrome. They have an infection with a virus that we can treat as chronic. We also can treat hepatitis B virus as chronic, and we can cure hepatitis C virus. And by the way, hepatitis C virus didn't exist when I trained. It was called non-A, non-B. Medicine is famous for saying things are not this. We don't know if they are, but we know they're not this. So it's like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It's not Hodgkin's lymphoma. Okay. So it is a remarkable industry, and it is truly a miracle that in this short span of modern medicine and modern drug development, we have essentially neutralized, not completely eradicated, but we have neutralized this horrendous disease. We've also done a lot of public health measures to clean and reduce transmission, et cetera. But it is quite striking. Let me just go back to the training, but I wanted to make that point. After medical school, I moved up to Boston, to Harvard, to train in internal medicine. And I want to tell you about a case that really was a big eye-opener for me, because this is why you get up in the morning and you really want to change the world. And as a young doctor, so when you go through medical school, you sort of learn the language. It's a little bit like learning Swahili in a classroom and never speaking Swahili in the places where they speak Swahili. You don't really speak Swahili. You don't. So you need to go to the place and learn it. So this is what happens in internship when you're learning intensively and you're staying up all night with some patients as they go through their course of their issues. The case that I want to talk about and just mention to you, and try to picture it with me if you would. It's an older man, a delightful man, because we learned in medicine that mostly bad things happen to good people. That's what we learned as medical doctors. Who had a long smoking history. Shame on him, he shouldn't have smoked, but that was true of most of the population. And he was hospitalized with severe pneumonia. Severe pneumonia in a smoker is never good. It's never good. Severe pneumonia is never good in anybody. But in a person, a smoker, they have limited reserve in their lungs. And we thought we knew what was causing pneumonia, which bacterium was, and he was getting pretty powerful antibiotics intravenously. He had a few other medical issues, but nothing to really write home about, except that from his smoking, he not only got emphysema, which is bad lungs, but he also had coronary disease, so heart disease in his arteries, and he had heart failure. And I will tell you that the combination of pneumonia and heart failure is really not a good idea, so please avoid. Usually you treat one condition and some of the other ones break and get worse, and that's a problem. So the patient was treated with strong antibiotics. He did okay. The pneumonia started to get better, the chest x-rays looked better, but his ability to breathe on his own went down because he was exhausted, because he had emphysema and he had heart failure, and it's exhausting. And we all take it for granted, breathing, but it involves a lot of muscles. And if you're that sick and that tired, you're exhausted. So eventually we had to put a tube down his throat into his lungs and attach him to a mechanical ventilator machine. And he could no longer talk, of course. He would communicate with his little board. And he was miserable because it doesn't feel good. And it's scary as heck. It's very scary. So the patient's condition, the pneumonia, had actually gotten better, but he just couldn't get off of the ventilator. And on a Friday afternoon, probably the timing was lucky here, the chief physician in the intensive care unit, so he had his own bed, he was on a ventilator, intensive care unit, he left me, I was a second-year resident now, in charge of the intensive care unit. And this was really upsetting to me. I just somehow took it personally, and I just knew that we weren't doing the best we could. So I had a big discussion, if you will, with the chief doctor and said, we're not doing everything we can. We need to try this drug and that drug and the other. And he came up with good academic reasons why A wouldn't work and B might not work and C was unlikely to work and D would have side effects. But the only other option was to basically tell the patient pretty much on Monday that we were going to have to insert a hole in his tracheolarynx and put a tube through a tracheostomy and attach him to a ventilator and send him off to rehab. And he probably would be on the ventilator for the rest of his life. And that just got me. Picture yourself there. You've got a really wonderful person. You used to talk to him, can't talk anymore. He's stuck on a ventilator. And obviously I wouldn't be telling you the story if the ending was good, so you can feel better that the ending is good. But I just couldn't stomach this. And I couldn't stand this notion that everything we would try would fail because we didn't even try. And part of drug development is to just give it a go, because doing nothing will not change. So long story short, later on that evening, around 10 o'clock, I really had lost my patience with the situation. And I approached the team in the intensive care unit because I was now the ranking doctor. And I said, I want to try a new drug, an old drug called aminophylline. It's a very old drug because it's shown some activity in these patients. It's got about a 25% chance of working, but that's better than zero. And after a long discussion with folks, and they said, well, the attending, the chief didn't want to do it, and so on, we did it. And we started him on the drug. The main activity of aminophylline is to strengthen your respiratory muscles. When you hear something like that in medicine, you know we don't really know what it's doing. But that's what we thought it was doing, and this would be an appropriate time to do that because he needed help. And we gave it to him. And I think it really did, as far as we could tell, because you can measure lots of stuff with a ventilator, it did strengthen his respiratory muscles. He was able to breathe better overnight. But the other thing that it does is it causes your heart rate to increase. And the reason this doctor was concerned, the head doctor was very concerned, because patients who have heart disease, who have a high heart rate, can have a heart attack. Now, but the patient's being monitored, so I said, we'll know if his heart rate goes up. We'll monitor him. We'll be careful. Still a risk. But I thought living life on a ventilator, that risk, I would take the chance, so I decided to do it. And the patient agreed. So he got on the drug. The other side effect of this drug, which turned out to be a blessing and may have been as important as the breathing muscle strength, was that it causes you to go to the bathroom a lot. You do tend to go, I don't know how to put it nicely. But remember, this man had a lot of fluid on his lungs because he had heart failure. So his pneumonia also makes the heart failure worse. So he started to go to the bathroom a lot. He must have lost about 3 or 4 kilograms of fluid. And overnight, his numbers got better. His breathing machine had to do less of the work until Saturday, and I was on the whole weekend. So there was no chief to come in and say, oh, you shouldn't have done that. On Saturday, the patient basically went from triple the normal levels of oxygen down to a normal level of oxygen, room air. Now, the machine was still pumping the air into his body, but the level of oxygen he needed to live was now normal. So that's a great step. And we actually asked him, do you want to try to breathe on your own? So of course he was excited. He thought we were going to pull the tube out, but we were just going to turn the machine to what's called a backup mode, so that in case he didn't breathe, it would kick in, and he would breathe on his own. And he started to do that, and he would do it for an hour, and he'd poop out, and the machine would kick in. But he would do it for an hour, and then he did it for an hour and a half. He would rest for 30 minutes, and over Saturday into Sunday morning, he was breathing a lot of the time on his own. And it's especially great when people do that on their own. And you could see this in front of your eyes. You could just see this man heading towards a great outcome. So, not to belabor the story, on Sunday morning his wife came in, we had a chat with him, and we said, tomorrow morning we want to take the tube out. And he said no. He wrote on his thing, no. And he said, I want it now. He wrote, I want it now. That's what he was saying. And you could actually see him. He was mouthing it around the tube that was going in. He wanted it out. He wanted to try. I said, look, you can do that, but if we have to put it back in, it's probably going to be permanent. But he and his wife said this is what they wanted. They really didn't want to wait anymore. So we took it out. midday Sunday. We put a mask on his face to help him breathe. And that's the last time he was on a ventilator. And Monday morning, I was a bit nervous because I had completely defied the chief physician, being all of having, 2 years of medical, not a year and a half medical training. But he was great, and he was discharged directly from the intensive care unit on Tuesday. He was doing so well that he just put his clothes on Tuesday. There was no reason to send him down to the regular part of the hospital. That is what it takes, that kind of audacity, and really, that's with an old drug. So now you have to layer on that, taking someone who's in real trouble and giving them something that's never been given to a human before. But this case, there were 3 or 4 other cases that changed my life, but this one probably was the most. This case was possible because somebody invented aminophylline. Somebody published on it. Somebody taught us that it exists. Now, we had the gall and the guts to use it. And we use it carefully with full knowledge of the potential risks and benefits. But we saved this man. He actually came back to visit me a week later. I had no idea who he was because he was dressed like a normal person. He looked like you all. You don't see patients as normal. You see patients as patients. And he came back and he said, Dr. Kauffman, you got me out of the unit. You saved my life. I said, I didn't save your life. I saved your ventilator. He said, that saved my life. And that's the kind of stuff that got me to thinking that we can and we need to do better. So I moved from internal medicine residency, where I had a nice internal medicine practice. I moved to Mass General Hospital. I kept my clinic going. I brought a lot of my patients from Beth Israel. I also started a fellowship in rheumatology, which is, some of you know, is the study of joint diseases and lupus and things like that. Back in a day when we didn't really have many drugs for rheumatology, for rheumatologic diseases. The problem I had was that I was very unsettled because the more I practiced, even in the year or 2 that I developed my practice, it wasn't good enough because I was having the same conversation about the limitations of the current medicines and the side effects, and really it just wasn't enough. And it was one patient at a time, which is critically important, but for me it wasn't enough. And it was really a purpose that got to me. That how am I really going to help change things and bring all this scientific knowledge that I had suffered through many years at Hopkins to bear on medicine? So I went there because I really believed that I could do more. So, one second, So after this, I was at Mass General for a while, and one of the lead doctors at the rheumatology clinic invited me to come to an interview at a company. Now, I can tell you back in 1995, when you were at a Harvard institution, you did not go to the dark side of the big, bad pharmaceutical companies, even though I realized perfectly well that the breakthroughs were all coming out of the pharma industry. We had a drug for rheumatoid arthritis that was being tested. It was the first real modern drug, called Remicade now, that was being tested at Mass General. And it was a blinded study, and we didn't know who was getting what, but we knew because the patients getting Remicade, their rheumatoid arthritis went away. You didn't need to be a genius to figure it out. All you needed to do was shake their hands. People who have rheumatoid arthritis that's active, you can't shake because their joints don't work. So we knew who was getting what, and I saw this, and I said, what am I doing here? I need to try to get involved in this stuff. This is a miracle. Anyway, it truly was a miracle drug, and it's really changed rheumatoid arthritis. So after 6 months of having this idea that you didn't go to the dark side, I went to this interview at Biogen. The interview ran from 7:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night. Back-to-back interviews, except for in the middle of the day, I got to give a 45-minute talk on the treatment of lupus, which is what I mostly saw in my practice. And I just say, interestingly, it's one of the great clinics I worked with when I did work at Biogen on lupus was right here at St. Thomas's. Some of the best people in the world are right here, so this is kind of fun to come back for that. But I learned a great deal at Biogen. I was there for 2 years. I learned everything I could. I took a drug from animal testing into humans the first time and then into a bunch of other studies. Unfortunately, eventually, after I left, the drug caused some side effects that we could have tackled. We know how to fix them. They cause clots. We know how to fix that, and unfortunately, I think they're actually fixing it now. It's many, many years later. But it was a great, great learning. But what was happening at the time back in 1997, 98 was the so-called genomics revolution. And some of you may remember this. This is before we understood the human genome, or at least had sequenced the DNA from people. And it's a little hard to imagine nowadays because it was 20 years ago. But we didn't know the complete sequence of the human genome, and there were a bunch of companies that were started to figure that out and to figure out how we could apply all this great knowledge that was going to come out to make completely new medicines, so-called personalized medicines and the like. Now, that hasn't quite panned out yet, and we're still pretty much stuck in the old 10 to 15-year paradigm. But I went to Millennium to try to play in that, and I got involved with some diagnostic testing and some molecular diagnostics for cancer, one of which is on the market for testing patients with early-stage melanoma, because about 5 to 10% of those patients think they have early-stage melanoma. Your doctor thinks you have early-stage melanoma, and you don't have early-stage melanoma. It has spread. We just haven't been able to pick it. So we had a test that could actually tell you that you need to look harder, and you need to watch more carefully so that we can give good medicines to get rid of it. And that made it onto the market. We did some other tests that have been supplanted in breast cancer and other diseases that have been supplanted by better tests. So we sort of lost the competition there, but there are better tests now, molecular tests, if you will, for all of that. So eventually we did so well with this diagnostics company. I wasn't real thrilled with diagnostics. It's nice, but I wanted to be in the therapeutics realm. I went over to Millennium, and again, I just could hear Ayn Rand looking down on us and saying, you've got to get a purpose, and you've got to get something that's big, and you want to change something. What Millennium had decided to do, because around the time of 2000, the DNA sequence of human beings was well known. Not well known, but it had been broken. It had been completed. The Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute here in the UK, MIT, Harvard collaboration in the US, and the NIH had all finished sequencing the first human genome. Nowadays, that took a year or two. Nowadays, I think we're down to a day or two, and the cost is a joke compared to what it used to be. It's less than $1,000 a person to have your whole entire genome done. But that was the first time it was done, and that was a holy grail. Millennium realized that its days as a science-based company were over, and it needed to become a drug company. So we did what a lot of companies do, and that's buy other people's drugs, because otherwise it's a long process. Much easier if you just take what somebody else did. We brought a drug, and this shows you how smart the industry is. We brought a company, and that company had 10 different products. One of those products was called PS341, which I'll tell you what it is in a minute. They had acquired that product in a going out of business sale. I kid you not, it's just like a rug company that you see going out of business. And that PS341 was one of the 11 drugs. It turned out that it was actually the first drug that got approved, and it's now called Velcade. We brought that in, and there was no medical doctor to handle that program. And it attacked a very new part of cancer. It attacked what's called a part of the cell called the proteasome. Very quickly, you don't need to know the biology. The proteasome is sort of the garbage disposal. Its job in the cell is to take anything that's used up or broken and dispose of it. Chew it up, spit it out, convert it to something the cell can reuse. It turns out cancer cells have a lot of this because cancer cells are always doing kinds of funky stuff. So a company called Proscript had made a drug that blocked the proteasome, and in testing in animals, it actually caused cancer cells to blow up. They would die, and the normal cells, they would get angry, if you will, but they would generally recover. So that was the drug, and like all things today in the world, it seems like, there are more opinions than hairs on the head. We had people that were telling us that it was unethical, and I mean that, unethical to block the proteasome. Why? Because it was so important. And we would say, but we block DNA replication. We give people horrible toxins. This drug in animals is pretty well tolerated. They said, we don't care about the data. It's unethical. And I kid you not, that there were people who said that you cannot safely do this. And they would whisper this in the CEO of Millennium's ear, and they would tell me, how could I do this as a doctor? That someday we would wake up and this would be a fatal thing. They said it often, and you know people that like to get on a bandwagon. We all see that in many aspects of life, and I'm saying to you it's no different for the development of many drugs. And they didn't look at the data. It's right out of Hank Rearden with Rearden Medal. It couldn't have been a better story in the drug development. We're going to ignore the data. We're going to start with what I believe, and by the way, we don't particularly like the people who are doing this. And that comparison really helped me get through it. Dr. Julian Adams is a gentleman who invented the drug, and myself, who became the first full-fledged vice president of clinical development and medical director on the drug, and a guy named Barry Green, who came from Astra Merck. And we stuck together and really saw this through. We were careful. We followed the data. We knew the drug worked in animals. We knew in humans it was fairly safe. And we tenaciously persisted through a lot of criticism and a lot of dire predictions. And some of it even started to come from the board of directors of Millennium. We sort of had half-hearted support of our executives at Millennium because they were hearing two stories. They were hearing breakthrough and they were hearing fatal. And they didn't know who to believe because here's a bunch of young, brash people, and I was a lot younger then, saying this is a breakthrough, and you had a lot of older people for the most part, but some younger people all saying this is unethical. Literally those words. We had minimal side effects, and we had an initial trial in patients with blood cancers, various types of blood cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, and myeloma. And we had one patient with myeloma who was quite an obese woman who really was in trouble, and she was going to die. She had gone through chemotherapy. She'd gone through all the drugs we had back then for this disease called myeloma, which I'll talk about in a minute. And she had nothing left. And we let her into the trial, and her disease disappeared. In 2 months on this therapy, which was then given intravenously, it disappeared. It went away. Her hair didn't fall out. She didn't puke her guts out. She really actually had minimal side effects at all. That was one. There were 2 others in the first 9 who had clear reductions in their myeloma, and as far as the doctors said, they lived longer than they were supposed to live. Medicine's very inexact, and you know we all get it wrong all the time. But this one patient really, plus 2 others, it was clear to me that this was a very important drug. It was not clear to many other people. It was clear to this tiny team at Millennium, this group of, if you will, almost like a John Galt group that just said, we're going to do this, and we persevered. Let me just take a sidestep in a minute for talk about myeloma. There's over 30,000 new cases of this disease. Some of you may know people who have it, and I hope nobody in here has it, but it's a very tough disease. 30,000 in the US, 6,000 in the United Kingdom every year, 42,000 overall in Europe, over 115,000 new cases per year diagnosed in the world. So it's actually a pretty common disease, and its incidence is going up. Frankly, I think that's mainly because people are living longer. They're not dying of pneumonia. They're not dying of heart disease. And we get a lot of patients as they get older. This is a disease that gets more common as you get older. The patients usually present with severe bone pain. There are people that wake up in the morning and they cannot get out of bed. And what happens is the tumor eats through the bone, and it hurts like hell. And it's excruciating pain. I mean, they go to the hospital, they get morphine, they get controlled, and then they figure out what's going on. They can come on with severe fatigue because it makes you very tired. Their kidneys can be shot. It can actually destroy the kidneys, and it can cause severe infection. So there's a lot of bad things with this tumor. It's insidious until it's a disaster. It's sort of a slow thing until bad things happen. In the year 2000, when we started this project, it took about 2 to 4 months on average to make the diagnosis because people hadn't really talked about it. They didn't know about this disease much, and there wasn't good therapy. The average lifespan of a patient when they got myeloma in the year 2000 was 2 to 3 years. That was it, and it was a death sentence. And there were very few people, less than 5%, who lived more than 5 years. Chemotherapy with steroids had some activity in the disease, but they caused a lot of side effects, and they weren't very active. And there were no modern drugs. There were no sort of targeted therapies. So here we come with this one drug, not a cocktail of things, and we give it to people intravenously, and they have a response, some of them. And there were, as I mentioned, there were antithetical reactions even in the myeloma community. We had people fighting whether it was a complete response or whether it was almost a complete response. I mean, like, seriously? The patient was going to die, and she's alive a year later. And we had 2 other patients who lived more than 6 months who were really in trouble. So we brought that in 2001. We drove ahead and opened up a phase 2 study, which means the second time you've been in humans. And we enrolled patients for this second clinical trial. And recruitment initially was very slow. You would think doctors would say, oh, got to get them on this new stuff, it might work. I don't have anything else. It's not how medicine typically works. Medicine is very slow, cautious, even in the setting of dire consequences, even in the setting where death is the option. Shockingly, it's better now because the awareness is there. But back then it was very tough, until we had another complete response out of New York City. And then we were flooded. We were flooded. We actually had originally 75 patients in the trial. It enrolled too quickly. We had 6 centers that enrolled 75 patients. This is not a common cancer, so 6 into 75 is about 12 and a half patients per center. That was amazing. And we had people screaming at us that they needed to get their patients on. So we increased the size of the trial to 200. We put 202 of the patients on. In the end, this long story short, 28% of the patients had at least, so about a quarter of the patients had at least a 50% reduction, and about half the patients had at least a 25% reduction in their tumor, and 10% of the patients had a near complete or a complete remission of their tumor with this intravenous therapy with minimal side effects. The main side effect is pain and tingling in your arms, hands, and legs. It does reverse. We didn't understand it back then. We understand it a little bit better now. And suddenly, as you can imagine, just like with Reardon Metal, everybody was a fan. And everybody in our company was suddenly working on Velcade, what became Velcade. Our marketing team did the analysis. They predicted that the maximum sales of Velcade worldwide were going to be $250 million. And I don't say that as a capitalist. I say that as the number of patients that are treated who benefit. The actual maximum, the high point of this drug, the peak sales, were only tenfold higher. $2.5 billion worldwide. It became one of the biggest drugs to treat myeloma, and it's also used to treat a kind of lymphoma as well. This is a true breakthrough, and it set the stage for the second breakthrough I'm going to talk about in a minute. This was reason, purpose, and self-esteem. I mean, the reasoning that Dr. Adams had to do this, the really purpose that he had to usher this thing through, and the confidence and the self-esteem to say, this is the right thing to do, at risk to myself and all. Well, there are a lot of people who are saying no. And again, just like Ayn Rand describes, everybody's a fan after the fact. So I thought about the experience and how we stood up to all the critics and the so-called experts, and how we were the first company ever to obtain a modern approval for this disease called multiple myeloma, and how we trusted ourselves. And I'll just recall a quick comment between Dominique Francone and Gail Winan in the Fountainhead. And Dominique says to Gail, she says, "You've never felt how small you were when looking at the ocean." And Gail laughs and he says, "No, never. Nor looking at the planets, nor at the mountain peaks, nor at the Grand Canyon. Why should I? When I look at the ocean, I feel the greatness of man. I think of man's magnificent capacity that created this ship to conquer all that senseless space. They're on a yacht together. When I look at mountain peaks, I think of tunnels and dynamite. When I look at the planets, I think of airplanes." That's what we all, I hope, aspire to. I'm not done yet, by the way. This is a great closing, but I got the second half. But really, this is the essence of what we try to do when we try to make breakthroughs and bring them to people. And you would be amazed, and I think maybe a little dejected at the criticism we get until it stops. But getting there is, there's what I call, sort of natural impediments to moving forward, and then there's all the hysterical subjective impediments to moving forward. So let me switch gears now and say that was really a life-forming event for me, and really, to me, talked about reason, purpose, and self-esteem, and what we needed to do to bring more medicines to people. It was pretty clear Velcade was on its path to approval. I stayed on as a as a consultant with the company through the actual approval. FDA had actually told us verbally they were going to approve this. They don't do that anymore. They're much more legalistic. But FDA had said yes, and the European Medicine Agency had also pretty much said this, we can get this done. They were all excited as well. And the drug got what's called accelerated approval in the US, and it got conditional approval in Europe about a year later for the treatment of myeloma. It's since become one of the largest drugs for the treatment of myeloma. It also formed a foundation for future drugs, which I'll talk to. So let me just switch gears and talk about an outcome that wasn't as good, because we all get them, and I hope for the people that are younger than I am, I'm 55 in case I don't look it, there are stumbling blocks. I left Millennium, I had an offer to become the CEO of a very interesting Israeli company that was starting up that aimed to integrate computer-based drug design at the foundation of discovery of new medicines. So currently, short story, we spend usually 3 to 5 years, what I call dicking around, pardon my American vernacular, messing around in the laboratory, trying to create a medicine that's worthy of being tested in animals and then humans. And that seemed to me to be too long, and it cost tens of millions of dollars, and frankly, for a lot of startup small companies with great ideas, it's just not sustainable. Also, investors are not terribly interested anymore in animal data. They want to get a drug into humans. So we really had to figure out a way to bypass this, and based on the PhD work of one of the founders at this company, which is called Predix for Predictive Technology, Dr. Sharon Shacham, who, by the way, later became my wife, for full disclosure, this small startup called Predix created a series of computer-based algorithms to shortcut this 3 to 5 year time frame and cut the cost from north of 10 million down to a few $1 million. I also had a competing offer at the time to go to a medium-sized pharma company, become senior vice president, which was a very nice, cushy job, and I get to spout off and talk and pretty much enact not much of anything. And I obviously took the harder road. And even though that was a tougher road that didn't end very well, it was absolutely the right thing to do. It ended well, and then I met Sharon, and we got married and started a new company, which I'll finish with in a few minutes. Predix turned out to be very difficult. It was a tough company. The company eventually folded. We got into a phase 3 study to try to come up with an antidepressant drug that didn't have the kinds of side effects that the current antidepressants do. It's a huge unmet need to try to make an antidepressant that works on depression and doesn't work on your appetite and your libido and so on. So we were unable to do that. We tried. We got into phase 3, which is last stage testing. We didn't get it. But we were able to learn a lot, and Sharon, importantly, was able to refine those computer-based algorithms, which led to her company, which she started, Karyopharm, which I'll be closing with later. So we did learn a lot, and we built a foundation for what is future now, what I hope is a breakthrough, and is currently under, as was mentioned earlier, is currently actually under FDA review for approval in myeloma, and will be, I hope, in front of the Europeans in the first quarter next year for approval in myeloma, and then lymphoma and many other diseases. But before, I want to talk about one more life lesson that I think is really, really pertinent. I left Predix because our funding situation became very tenuous and precarious. I became a biotech investor for about a year at Bessemer Venture Fund. Great fund, made some great investments, but it really wasn't enough for me. And I was looking for the next company and the next great idea to really have an impact. And I still had that Velcade success and excitement. And as I was watching Velcade grow in the market and so on, I was asked to join the board of a small startup company across the US in San Francisco called Proteolix. They were developing an improved version of Velcade. So they basically said, nice job, Michael and Julian, but we can do better. Not only can we make it safer without this tingling and pain and neuropathy, but we can make it even more effective. And I said, no way. The hubris of being the only drug in that class, the hubris of thinking you understand something. And I said, no way, with a little bit of sort of, I wouldn't be so surprised, Michael, but part of it is to speak with authority, even if you're not sure. Well, you're never sure until somebody comes up with a better idea. So they were developing a better idea. The team at Proteolix created a novel drug candidate, which is called PX171. We'll get to the real name in a minute. And it showed increased activity and reduced toxicity in animals. It turns out animals do get this neuropathy. You have to give it to them for a long time, but they eventually get it and you can measure it. This drug didn't do it. It also was able to kill tumors that were bigger in the animals than Velcade was able to do. So they asked me to review the data, and I said, you know, actually, maybe they did do something that I didn't think could be done. It's great. They were right. I was probably wrong. Let's see what happens in people. And no good deed goes unpunished. They asked me to join the board, and I became the chairman. And we had several intense board meetings. One of the problems with drugs that work really well is sometimes they cause problems. There is a syndrome in people who have leukemias and lymphomas and myeloma called tumor lysis syndrome. And that's if you have a drug that's super active and it kills a lot of the tumor quickly, it can cause so much of the tumor to die, it's like being in a car accident. It's like your body hits something and you can't recover it. You can't get rid of those dead tumor cells fast enough. First your kidneys shut down, then your blood becomes acidotic, and eventually your heart will stop if you don't get on this. And sometimes you can't rescue the patient. The only bright star about tumor lysis syndrome is it's issue of a very active drug. So we had two cases, unfortunately, of patients who passed away from tumor lysis, who had refractory myeloma, who got this drug, and they died. And we had a board that you can imagine, we had half the board saying, shut this drug down, we're done with it, we're getting out, we're leaving. And the other half of the board, and I wasn't an investor, I was just on the board, saying this is a remarkable drug. We know how to prevent tumor lysis. Give us 6 months, we will put preventative measures, we'll make sure it doesn't cause the problem again, and we will have this drug. The drug is called Kyprolis. Usually when you hear a drug name, it means it was successful. Kyprolis sells about $1 billion now. The company Proteolix was acquired by Onyx. The company was acquired for about $850 million, and then eventually Amgen bought Onyx for about $12 billion. It's mainly to point out that this drug, after this scary moment of a board meeting that ran up in San Francisco until midnight, that's 3 a.m. East Coast time, I was dying. But we almost came to a fight. I mean, that's how passionate the opinions were on either side of the table. Many of you have been through this, some of you have not. Don't expect a lot of agreement when you're doing things that are cutting edge. There won't be. This will be a fight. I hope it doesn't come to fists. I would have lost. I'm much shorter than the guy that was leading the fight on the other side. We'll wait a little bit more, so maybe I would have had, and I knew how to wrestle. I don't know if he did. But we turned out to be right, and he ended up as an investor. He did very well, and he sort of thanks me now. But you know, being proved wrong is also not very palatable for a lot of people. But I think the main take home for me was that you do have to go with your self-esteem, and you have to see that, and you have to see a path, because for new drugs, at least, like many things in life, there's one path to yes, and there are 10,000 obstacles in your path. So as the clinical work was maturing at Proteolix, this company, we were acquired by Onyx, as I mentioned. I was the chief medical officer. It turned out I would move from the chairman of the board to head up medicine because they lost their chief medical officer. They needed a stand-in, so I stood in. So the last part of the talk just winds down with where things are now. While I was busy playing around with this Kyprolis drug, my wife, Dr. Sharon Shackham, as I mentioned, started a company called Karyopharm, armed really with reason and purpose. She's a good Ayn Randian. When I met her, and she came to me one day when she was at the company, and she said to me, you know, why is leadership so lonely? And I handed her Atlas Shrugged, and I walked away. So that went well. And she started this new company, Karyopharm. Karyo means nucleus. And she started this company to focus on nuclear abnormalities in cancer. We raised, initially, Sharon and I put money into the company, and she had some animal data. We then met a very wealthy investor from Europe. We went to venture capitalists. They told us all that it was too cool, it was too interesting, it was too cutting edge when we have human data come back to us. But we met a gentleman who used to do charitable giving, and he decided to be charitable with us, and he invested. And to make a long story short, Sharon has overcome a lot of those 10,000 reasons. We're currently, as I mentioned, with selinexor, which is our new drug. It's an oral drug. It's a completely different mechanism. It's really the essence of reason, purpose, and self-esteem to get through this. We're in front of FDA. We'll be in front of the Europeans. We're in myeloma. I hope next year we'll be filing our applications for marketing approval in lymphoma. And I just want to close with one last bit of observations, because this is really a breakthrough, potentially a breakthrough therapy. I don't want to talk a lot about it, as we're a public company. This is a pill that you take at home. And you can all, if you can close your eyes and just imagine, if somebody has a cancer that has gone through all the drugs we have available today, and you can go home and take a pill once or twice a week, and that tumor will shrink, and your side effects are minimal. There are some, but they're not nearly as bad as the tumor. And to have a drug like that is truly miraculous and really enables all of us. So in closing, I would say that the U.S. is the leader in drug invention and development. I hope it's something that'll change in the future. We need to change that. We need to keep bringing out great new drugs for people, because when you or your family members get sick, and that's just a fact of life, we all want them. We all want them to be there then. We don't want them to be tested and I can't get it. We want those drugs, and we want to know what the risks and the benefits are. We have to keep fostering this industry. And I'm not saying that as self-serving, I'm saying that as a human being who will eventually succumb to one of these diseases. We've done amazing things. We talked about HIV. We've cured hepatitis C virus. When I trained, it was, as I mentioned, not even named. We've cured it. It costs a lot of money, but we've cured it. We can eradicate diseases. We can treat parasites we didn't even know the names of 10 years ago. We're preventing many diseases. The number of vaccines we have tripled. They don't cause autism. After many, many studies, they don't cause autism. That's the facts. Many people don't like that fact, but it's a fact. And we've prevented many, many deaths. So in conclusion, on behalf of my wife and many of my colleagues, for us at least, we ask what's more heroic than to defeat a disease, to restore life and health to people who are suffering from illnesses, especially terminal diseases, to give people opportunities, to reach celebrations and milestones in their lives, and to those friends and families that were never possible even a few years ago. And for us to all remember that each new medicine that we create not only helps patients today, but changes medicine for the future and makes it better so the next generation of medicines can sit on the shoulders of those giants. Ayn Rand so uniquely and appropriately characterized humans as heroic. Look around at our accomplishments in many fields, not just medicine, many fields. It's a testament to Rand's philosophy that applies to so many fields. All of the heroes, of course, in the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. One of the groups she left out was pretty much the drug inventors, which I hope I added to today. And it is a testament to the very best within us. Thank you very much, and I'll take questions.
You must be utterly frustrated, surely, by the amount of regulation that goes on over the drug industry when you can see from your own personal experience that this is somebody who's got no other option, and there's a possibility, might be an outside possibility, that you've got rules and regulations that say you can't do that. Is that frustrating, or do you think that it's just one of the things that you have to deal with in business if you're an entrepreneur?
You can imagine, also as a doctor, I feel pretty strongly about that. When the option is death, there can really be no serious discussion about whether a person should be allowed to try something. In the United States, recently a watered-down version of the right to try law was passed because it basically said that the government is not in charge of your body, and the government is not really, doesn't really get to decide if something is safe enough to give to someone who's dying. It really, at least, should be somewhat, or to a large extent, up to the patient. So I think that has helped. We have a compassionate use program, expanded access program that works across the globe. When patients need our drug, they can apply. Generally, the regulators, it's cancer, so they do tend to be better about cancer than other diseases. They generally approve these things. I can't think of a case where it was not approved for at least use. But for the large number of patients that don't know about this or don't have the means to apply, apply. It's very frustrating to me, and it is a huge problem.
Right, we're open to questions. I saw a gentleman about 2/3 way back. Yeah, there you are. You still in the market?
Sorry. Good evening. I'd like to know your opinion.
You say who you are.
My name is Mary Fournier. I work for an energy company, so the health economics is my sector of expertise. I'm interested in health economics. I'd like to know your opinion. What would be the best system? Would be a health-funded, public-funded system, or a privately funded health system? Because you mentioned your company provides trial drugs on compassionate grounds, but I guess that was the case, and I don't really see the business case if the company only funded it on compassionate ground.
I'm not an economist, and this is a growing, and it will be a growing problem. I personally believe, and again, I'm not an economist, I think that for a civilized country, a wealthy civilized country, to spend more of its GDP on health, with, of course, outcomes research and so on, but to allow people access to breakthrough medicines, that's a good use of its dollars. And I think we have to continue to support, as I mentioned at the end, I hope we continue to support this system, or even make it more robust, to come out with new therapies, because we can do it. We have the brains, we have the reason and purpose and self-esteem to come up with new therapies. We have to have a way to get a return on investment. You're quite right. Our compassionate use program is simply because in medicine, and with Ayn Rand in mind, but in medicine, when someone is facing death, it's a very difficult discussion to have, a moral discussion about whether we provide that medicine or not, to be honest. And I think we believe it's absolutely the right thing to do. In America, believe it or not, despite what you hear, when patients are destitute and they need a medicine, they get it. They do get it. They get it usually for free because the people who are paying full price for it, or near full price, are covering the cost. You also know that the prices of medicines are very high. You're not paying for the cost of the pill. The pill costs cents to make. Even injectables are $1 for an injection. You're paying for the $500 million to $2 billion that went into getting that drug to the market. We will spend over $700 million if our drug gets approved, and that is considered a very efficient process. And if we want to create new medicines, we have to figure out a way to fund them. So I can't really help you on fixing the whole global problem, but I would say we ought to put the money in it, because spending on people's health is a good thing.
Okay, right.
Sorry, can I ask this?
No, you can't. Right, let's go to there. Right. I'm sorry, I thought it was the same person. It's a different person. Okay, yeah. You don't get second questions in this.
Thank you very much, Nick Bosenket, Professor of Health Policy at Imperial College. I'm a great fan of the achievements of the pharmaceutical industry, particularly when it produced blockbusters such as statins, antidepressants and others for use in mass and chronic common diseases. And you say that the US is a leader in drug development. That's less true actually now with the Swiss industry coming along so fast. But it's certainly not a leader in health outcomes or in value for money in health services. Can't we apply the Ayn Rand philosophy to increasing the access to low-cost, patient-managed remedies for a lot of common diseases which are sadly lacking in many parts of the world, particularly in the US? I'm thinking of heart disease, arthritis, diabetes, COPD and others.
Again, I cannot solve these amazingly complicated questions, but I would say In my opinion, the generics program, which is that patents run out after 21 years, plus or minus 3 years typically. Patents to protect inventions run out at this time. Most drugs, by the time they actually get on the market, have somewhere between 5 and 10 years of patent life left. Because of the 21 years they have, most of it's been used up playing around in the clinic and the laboratory trying to understand how best to use the drug. So the generics is a way to foster the low cost for sure. And I'm a huge believer. I mean, I still write prescriptions for people, and I always try to give them a generic drug because they work. It's the innovative medicines I think we have to focus on, and a way to make sure that we continue to fund them. They will become generic. And like you say, the statins, I mean, the statins are miracles, truly. This has changed the world of heart disease. That's why we have so many more cases of cancer, because people are not getting as much heart disease and they're doing better after it. So I can't solve all those problems, but I would keep in mind on the low-cost side that we do have the generics program, and I'm strongly for it. I'm glad we're getting generic biologicals as well.
I'm going to sweep across this way. Yeah, get there.
Hi, my name is Dimitris. I'm a law student with a background in philosophy. I just wanted to hear your thoughts regarding, if you have any, regarding the idea of biomedical enhancements, since it relates not only to getting rid of illnesses, but sort of improving people's capacities beyond normal capacity, basically, and especially in relation to gene editing.
Yeah, these are things that are upon us for sure. I mean, gene editing is going on now. We have companies that are editing genes. For those of you who don't know, that's when you literally send in a piece of DNA or RNA or something into a cell, inject it under someone's skin. It goes to the right place. It goes to the right gene. You have 30,000 genes in your genome. It finds the 1 out of 30,000 that it should. It cleans that up. In the near future, it being 10, 15, 20 years, maybe sooner, there will be cures for a lot of the diseases that are caused by known genetic problems. The biomedical enhancements are another step from that. It's using non-DNA, non-RNA, artificial material. Look, I think we have to deal with this. We have to address it. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that by making laws in some part of the world, it's not going to happen in other parts of the world. So I think we have to figure out how to use it ethically. We also have to deal with the problem of people that are forced to hang on too long. And I bring up just the other side of the spectrum, because there are some people that have had enough. And I can tell you, even in my practice, and I think it's a little better now, but when I trained, we had patients that have also said, I don't want to fight anymore, I'm done. And you have a system which is very slowly, perhaps changing, and has changed in some European countries, but at least in the US it's a problem, that says, no, it's not up to you. So I think we need to look at both, but I think it's naive to think we're not going to continue to make progress in there to do it. And I think the best thing to do is look the progress in the face and figure out how to do it ethically, and I think you're actually situated pretty darn well to do that.
Thank you. I'm a recent PhD student in bioinformatics. I wanted to ask you, what do you think about Martin and Shkreli situation that happened in the United States?
Sorry, the which?
About the Martin Shkreli situation. You know this guy who bought a company and then increased the drug prices dramatically, and people started to investigate him.
Yeah, look, there are always, as Ayn Rand says, and there's always a bunch of bad actors and people that put a blemish. You know, one of the things we have to do as objectivists and people that are thoughtful about these things is you can't blame the entire industry because there's people that do the whole thing. I made a statement about generics before. I don't believe that old things should be applauded and rewarded greatly. If a drug is off patent, it's off patent. It needs to be made at low cost. It needs to be available at cost plus a small amount, and that's the end of it. Our industry is, I can tell you, our industry was embarrassed by that situation. Terribly, because what it does is hurts the innovative products that we make. And that's what we all want, the innovative products. And we want our innovative products in 10 years to go off patent, or whatever the patent life is, but as I said. And then we'll come up with new innovative products. That's how we think it best.
NHS Royal Marsden, actually was a myeloma research project to do with machine learning. So my question is there much of a role of machine learning in pharmaceuticals as there is in my industry, radiology, for example?
Yeah, the question about machine learning. It's been very tough. I believe at some point it will come. And we have Watson, we have advertisements of Watson all the time, IBM's Watson supercomputer that somehow is going to roll up all our data and solve all the self-care problems because they're going to figure out exactly who needs to get what at the right time. I got to tell you, medicine, you know, as much as the science has come along, it's a Gestalt-based art. And I think we need to keep trying to make progress in these areas because obviously we're never going to make the progress unless we try. But the notion that we're going to figure out how to do medicine on people, you know, machine learned medicine and really figure out what's going on, I just think it's a little bit farther off than people would like to talk about this stuff. I would just say, we sequenced the human genome back in 2000. There are, other than gene editing, which for sure has benefited from sequencing the genome, but drugs like the kind that I have worked on in my past, monoclonal antibody, none of that has come out of the genome project, none of it. This notion of personalized medicine that we're going to come in with the secret silver bullet and knock out, you know, have the kryptonite for Superman and just, the rest of us are not going to feel it. It hasn't even come close to happening yet. Doesn't mean we don't try, and we need to keep trying. But I don't also think it's fair to sell people a dream that's perhaps a decade or 2 or 3 away rather than now. We know the human genome, the sequence of the DNA, we sort of know the actors in the play, but no one's given us the script, is the bad analogy that I like to use. So they're all fluttering around doing stuff and saying gibberish. We know who the actors are, but we have no idea really how it really interacts at a real scientific, biochemical, molecular, biological level yet.
We have only a few minutes left, so who feels a question welling up inside them so violently that they might explode? We've got take about 2. You, I think, were the first person to indicate your explosive nature.
Investing in public equities. I was very curious actually. There's liberal economists that have commented on the fact that seeing how similar the drug approval processes in Europe, Canada, and the United States, we seem to be doing a lot of, or we could probably simplify the approval process for drugs that have been approved in one of those jurisdictions in the other. I would assume, first of all, that you agree, but I was very curious about what other similar sort of relatively quick regulatory fixes you think could lower the cost of new drugs in the United States and around the world.
Yeah, look, it's a very long question, but I will tell you the one thing I think could really help. There are drugs with 90+% assurance that we know when we put them in 100 people, we know they work. There are those drugs. Those drugs still have to go through this laborious process of testing. It's kind of silly. Now, 10% of the time we're going to be wrong, and 10% of the time we're going to have major side effects that we didn't pick up. But 9 times out of 10, we're going to figure it out. So the short answer, you know, I'm happy to discuss later. The short answer is when we know a drug works by our best medicine and our best intelligence, we need to bring it out, let it be on the market, and tell people there's a risk. This has not been studied as well, but we believe that the potential benefits way outweigh the risk, and it needs to get out there. And that way we make the potential upside. But people have to know there's going to be some risk.
Let's just take two more. I did see an explosive person in the front here.
Hi, my name is Lillian Nandi. I've got a background in computational modelling. What I want to ask is that you speak about purpose and reason, but a lot of drug development is carried out by large groups of even pharmaceutical companies. So how can you engender that sort of culture of purpose and reason for such a large group?
Yeah, look, I'm a guy, full disclaimer, I've been in mostly small companies. When I was in a medium-sized company, I wanted to shoot myself, and the team generally wanted to shoot me. It is very, very difficult. the amount of wasted baggage and idiotic discussion is enormous. And the larger the group, it's a little like the U.S. Congress. It's a great way to get nothing done when you put enough group, because there's always academic reasons why not to do something, and it's very difficult. That's one reason I like staying at a small company. And we see a response. We're going. That's where we're going. We're not going to have a long discussion about it.
We want to ask questions. One last one. The gentleman just in the front there, I saw, yes.
So my name is Roger James, and I've worked in lots of pharmaceuticals. So I have a personal question, which is, you've clearly got a great track record. Yeah? So are you lucky or not? And if you're not lucky, but you're applying the aim round method, so let's put that out there, what would your advice be to other companies to generate the luck?
If I'm not looking, I'm sorry, I feel lucky. Look, timing is a lot. I was at Millennium, and I came in, my company was bought into the parent Millennium. We brought this drug that had a response. I didn't invent the response. I looked at it, I said, this is clearly going to be an important drug, we need to study it. It was timing, it was luck, it was an opening. I think you really have to look you have to prioritize. What I find so remarkable in our day and age is we get people with more education, their ability to prioritize things has just gone away. Everything becomes equally important. And you have to be able to look at a problem. I think, and Rand, I think, said every argument has a right and a wrong. Of course they're not 100% on the other side. But if you don't, when a patient with a refractory tumor responds to a drug, they need that drug. There are side effects, you need to support it. If it's dying of cancer or having a side effect, you need to give them the side effect. Talk to them, they get to decide. But for me, at least in my life, it's always been, and our drug struggled for a little while, now it's, it's hopefully at the end, because we focused on what was really important. And I think in life, at least for me, setting out the real priorities has helped me and not get confused by all this other stuff that we all like to show how, I guess, intelligent we are.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for coming. I hope that you will join us for a drink in the drawing room and the exhibition room afterwards. We have yet more books by Ayn Rand in the far corner there, which I don't think we're even charging for. So you can clean up there. And thanks to our sponsor, Karyopharm, for making this event possible again. Thank you very much to our staff at the Objectivist Institute, who have worked very hard to make this event happen. And thanks once again to our speaker, Dr. Michael Kauffman. Michael, you should keep Adam Smith close to your heart. And to help you do that, here's an Adam Smith tie.